I'm Dylan Ratigan. I've interviewed nearly every CEO and most world leaders during the past 25 years. And now I'm bootstrapping. I'm turning my attention to the new CEOs and the irrepressible entrepreneurs leading the next generation of innovation in the world. Welcome back to tastylive. I am Dylan Ratigan. Time for some more bootstrapping. We're doing a special edition, or a special series, I should say, of bootstrapping entitled Ideas into Companies. And there is no better guest for the very first edition of bootstrapping ideas into companies than the one and only Howard Tolman, who spent decades of his life either trying to do it himself or help others do it. And Howard, it's nice to see you again. I have there's a saying, as you may or may not know, I've been made my home much of the time in Italy, in Milan, the last few years, and there's many great Italian saying. The Italians have many great sayings, the little sort of truisms,
Yeah.
And one of them is, tra il dire e il fare c'è un mezzo di mare. The distance between the distance between speaking and doing is the span of an ocean, which is sort of a good for the ideas into companies. But there's two others which I won't subject you to my horrible Italian. But one of them is very profane, but I'll say it anyway because it's a financial network and we can tolerate it. If you look in the mirror and you see four balls, it's not because you have four balls, but it's because there's something happening behind you that you would not like to have happen, which is a more profane thing that I won't say here.
Good grief.
So if you're really feeling if you're feeling really confident,
right,
be careful. And then my favorite is execution eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the most relevant one for the series on ideas into companies. And so you have not only turned ideas into companies, but helped them, and you just had to invest, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm curious how you make the decision and how you, considering that this is a public discussion, how you would advise others to help make the decision as to whether it is even worth attempting to turn an idea into a company, because the number of ideas is unlimited, and the number of people that believe the idea is the answer to the problem is, that's problem number one, is if you think the idea is the answer to the question. So I'm just interested how you interpret that Italian truism, which is that execution eats strategy for breakfast when it comes to turning an idea into a company.
Well, to begin with, I told Jules that I would have suggested ideas into invoices because the transition to a company is fine, but to your point, until people are willing to pay you for something, it could be a hobby. It could be a bad bet. It could be a lot of things. So, but I'll tell you, we've simplified it. And I tell this to every entrepreneur, and I tell it to every investor. And it's 6 simple questions. And I can take any company, any business plan, any proposal, and go right down the line. And, I'll share them with you. I mean, number one is, is it going to save me time? Is it going to save me money? Is it going to help me make better decisions? Is it going to make me more productive? Is it going to improve my health? And the last one, which I've added most recently, is it going to affect or impact my social status and sort of this fulfillment thing, which previously we didn't understand the impact on people under 30 of the whole social world. But today, that's as much a driver as any of these other things. I mean, these kids don't give a rat's ass, frankly, about money and some of the other things that we grew up thinking were significantly important. It's much more about presence and peers and things like that. So, but that checklist has stood us in good stead. And the only thing
as a filter to even figure out whether it's worth more time or more
absolutely
research.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one is to look at it. Which, and by the way, those define, attractiveness, those define need, those define a lot of the things that are, part of the process. But it also makes it very clear that the test is a highly subjective, highly personal test, and We see a lot of business plans, even today. The other thing I would tell you is, and I tell this to young entrepreneurs and older entrepreneurs too, and that is that I think in the whole world of AI, and AI is worth four different episodes, but I think when I look at what's going on with I hearken back to, I think it was 25 years ago when I was a game developer. And we thought when that business started, when that entire industry started, and believe me, I was there, that we were going to build game engines. And then along came these three little guys called Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo. And we discovered we weren't going to build engines. We were going to build on top of engines. Okay. And today, I would say the analogy is 100% exactly the same. We're going to have 1,000 businesses, and they're going to say, I'm building an AI, whatever. Okay. And what they're really saying is, I'm renting space on top of someone else's machines because, frankly, apart from Amazon, Google, and a couple of other players out there, nobody has the tens of billions of dollars to take off their balance sheet and invest in the capital required to accumulate the compute that it's going to take to build these things. Over and above that, however, they may never be experts in the specific requirements of a certain kind of AI for an industry, and that's where the opportunity is. So I say to people, understand that you're not going to build the next Google, but you may very well build an unbelievably profitable industry-specific vertical application that's very powerful and useful. And the last thing is, it's going to be easy again. Right now, it's not, but it's going to be easy again in the AI world and in some of this, new science world to get either a little money or a lot of money. And the people who get a lot of money early on, I think, are making a terrible mistake because they're
Meaning in terms of raising a lot of money or a little
raising
money.
a lot of money.
You're
Yeah,
saying raising a lot of money early is not a good thing in your opinion.
it's not a good thing because it's not necessary anymore. It doesn't demonstrate, heft or
It doesn't.
wherewithal.
It's not a. It's not a relevant validator.
Exactly. But even more importantly, it makes your exit strategy 100 times harder
Mm-hmm.
because in order to give your investors a return, you can't be 3 to 5 years out and do an M&A deal that's perfectly wonderful because you've raised 50 million bucks and you need a valuation that you're never going to secure. So that's our little starting point.
Yeah. If you were to look at the key, so that's a good filter for sort of reducing ideas, and that's a great guide post for raising money, which is, I think, a critical trap that people fall into. It doesn't, however, ultimately resolve the. So let's say I've got a good idea, and
Right.
I've raised the right amount of money. So at least I have a better chance that's presumed to execute well because you have a precondition of a pathway where there's real demand or a
Right.
real potential value to invoice, and you haven't trapped yourself inside of a bizarro valuation at the outset. At the same time, there's a lot of companies that have a good product idea or a good product, a good market for their product and the right capital structure, but they never deliver because of the challenges associated with execution and team building.
Yeah. And look, I agree with that. I would add only one more thing, which is my favorite expression, and that's today I tell everybody to build to be bought because I think that we know now that, Google is 1 in 1 trillion. I mean, the VC percentages are maybe 2 out of 10. But if you're smart enough to position yourself so that, your dream is not to be the next anything, but it's to be, acquired
The
at a
latest
reasonable,
something.
yeah, to be acquired at a reasonable, number. I think this idea of building to be bought is very, very strategic. And then, to your point, I mean, execution is half the story. The other half is team. If you don't have the right team, you can't execute.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes to, do you get newbies or do you try and get experienced people? The market is flooded with people from 40 to 60 who
Mm-hmm.
have substantial skills, but may or may not be suited to the startup, business environment and may
So
never get.
what do you have any sort of thoughts on team building or team assembly?
Well,
in terms of posts or barriers or
I think in the first of all, I think in the remote world that we're going to be stuck with in perpetuity, it's hard to build a team. I think trying to build a team over Zoom is almost impossible. So I think you have to deal with that cultural issue, which is you probably need people in a startup environment to be in proximity to each other. And then part two is I think that you really have to get people that are have concluded that that are passionate about an idea because a lot of these companies I'm seeing are dealing with people whose expectations just aren't remotely realistic. I mean, you're not going to leave your corporate job and replace that kind of compensation with all of those perks in the world of entrepreneurship or in the world of startups. And so I think that you need to sort out the people that are sort of engaged in a fantasy, and get the people that want to really roll up their sleeves. The other thing is a lot of these people are just not employable going forward. I mean, they are in that horrible sandwich trap of having kids in college and parents who are aging out, and they've lost their position that they were in for 10 or 15 years. And honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I think that
meaning that they can't take up the startup lifestyle because their floor is too high. They
their
can't tolerate
A,
the
their
insecurity.
their floor is too high. Their responsibilities and obligations make them, so risk averse that they're looking for levels of security and assurance that don't exist in this world.
Mhm.
So
Um, is it better to have a mediocre idea, but the right team and the right structure and the right execution? Would you rather invest in a mediocre? I mean, obviously the answer is going to be neither, but gun to your head, you got a mediocre idea, but a great team and a great path, or a great idea with a weak team. I'm just, how do you
well,
prioritize sort
that's
of?
that's easy because if you don't think that every idea is going to be pivoted and changed and varied over time, you don't understand the game we're in either. And so you need the team to pivot and to be adaptable and resilient. That's a guarantee. A great idea is comes along once in a while. But look, I think we're also going into a time that another very interesting change is whether the next 100 ideas that we see, and leave AI out for a moment, the next important ideas I think don't have a venture capital time horizon. In other words, I don't think it's 3 to 5 years to some kind of result. I think it's 10 years if you're talking about environment, climate, agriculture, medicine. And so I don't think the VC community is even going to play in these spaces. I think we're going to look for family offices, we're going to look for legacies, we're going to look for strategic partners who are willing to understand that you don't bring a new drug to market, in less than, you know,
10 years.
yeah, 5 to 10 years, exactly. And the VC world doesn't have that perspective. I mean, they don't even begin to have that perspective. So I think we'll see VC in areas like logistics. I think we'll see it in helping to improve using AI, using machine learning, helping to improve the efficiency of a lot of organizations. And I would call those, by the way, mediocre, not great ideas, because nobody's going to jump off a building because you say, I've improved the throughput of this process by 50%. It's going to hit the bottom line. It's going to be a wonderfully valuable thing, but it's more like underwear than it is revolutionary.
Where do you put, or how do you relate to the what I'll call the more revolutionary ideas? Somebody comes in and they say, I've got a cure for heart disease, or somebody comes in and says, I've got a wireless electricity, like sort of the revolutionary ideas, I guess, to repeat what I said. How do you
Yeah,
how do you even relate to them? The moonshot.
that's not the moonshots are not something that we would be interested in, frankly. I mean, I think the only people entitled to do moonshots are people like Google X, who set aside $100 million and say we're absolutely prepared to lose $100 million for the one in a zillion. Or Elon would say the same thing. I mean, but anybody running any kind of prudent strategy, trying to get a return, or running an existing business, trying to enhance the business, you can't be in the moonshot business today. It's too costly. And by the way, I mean, another of the sort of impediments to a lot of what's going on out there is all of a sudden we have levels of court litigation and government regulation that are, horrendous. I mean, if the tech community has prevailed in the last 10 years, and I have a chart, I don't have it here, but if you looked at the amount of regulation on a bar chart, the bottom line, the deepest line would be something like manufacturing, 10 trillion different regulations. The tech community is up at the high end of this thing. It's the least regulated industry because the technology is so far ahead of regulation, and government is traditionally 10 years behind innovation. But that's closing. That window is closing, and now the hurdles are going to be substantial. I think crypto is a perfect example. I mean, the stuff that they got away with in crypto, pretending for years that it wasn't a security, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, it's not regulated. When you look at, the future of crypto, I think it's going to be, apart from Bitcoin, which I think is just going to turn into a solid asset class, and maybe Ethereum. But other than that, I mean, I think that we're going to have these regulators, sticking their nose into and making life difficult for everyone who has a moonshot, because they're going to say, come back to me in 5 years after the FDA has blessed a trial, or come back to me in 10 years after you decided that it doesn't cause cancer to, have sick, whatever. So I think that it's that level of impediment is something that we didn't have, in the past, in a lot of industries, and it's going to be super present. The FTC, the SEC, less so. The only people that won't be interfering with anything are the Federal Election Commission, who apparently they're completely indifferent, and the post office guy, whoever this idiot is, that continues for a reason that I can't explain to be able to, permitted to run the post office and slowly destroy it. And I don't know about you. I mean, we've foregone Saturday mail now. We occasionally go for a day or two when, stuff that we thought was mailed from around the corner takes a week to get there. I mean, this guy is destroying the postal service, day by day, and he's still there. I don't know.
So my last question for you has to do not so much as with your expert or your investor, your seasoned investor hat, but as your entrepreneur operator hat, which is assume, okay, I've got the money, I've got the idea, I've cleared all these filters, and now every day I wake up and I need to set priorities for the use of my time and attention, which becomes my single most critical resource. And the greatest risk is the misallocation of my time and attention. The greatest asset is the efficient use of my time and attention. And typically none of us, even the most brilliant, even Elon, I'm sure, would say that you don't really know if you used your time and attention really well until after the fact.
Yeah.
Right. It's only in retrospect that you're like, oh, that was a terrible waste of time, or though that was a terribly good use of time. But still, there are better and worse ways to sort of at least give yourself some guideposts going into each day. I'm curious how you look at that.
Yeah, well, I would call them, gutters or bumpers. I mean, I think that you have to filter. Okay. I think you have to carve out parts of your business day in order to get into the flow, in order to be uninterrupted. Very difficult to do. We live in attention. You're either seeking attention, paying attention, or, avoiding attention. But I mean, we're so dopamine up that it's frightening. And so I think that having the discipline to say, from 6 a.m. till 8 a.m, I read. That's all I do. I don't do one other thing. And then I have meetings for maybe a couple of hours. It's literally about control.
You're saying creating You're saying the more you can
structure.
create structure within the day where exercise at
Absolutely.
this time, meetings at this time, email at this time, reading at this time.
Yeah.
So basically, a well-organized schedule becomes an essential component.
Listen, it's a barrier to interruption, and it's you driving your day, not your inbox driving your day. And that's about all you can do. I mean, and still there's going to be crises and whatever. But I remember Michael Dell. I mean, when Michael Dell first started the company, everything was crisis driven. Everything was we have to respond in 2 seconds, And as he started to finally bring in grown-ups, he had this huge cultural problem, which was the young Turks, the guys who started the company, thought that the older people didn't get it. They thought, oh, these guys are
Because
lazy.
they were running schedules as opposed to a
Yeah,
gang tackle on the latest
yeah,
crisis,
exactly.
crisis, crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And he eventually said, no, no, these people, we brought them in for exactly that reason, to calm things down and to understand that we can't be all things to all people all the time. And that's really how Dell exploded. That's really how they grew it. And I think that, when you look at the people, and Elon is a horrible example because Elon's trying to do like three things at the same time. And I don't, and frankly, he's added another 23 things that make no sense at all. But I mean, there are disciplined people. I mean, I read an article recently that said Bill Gates never let go of Microsoft. I don't know if you happen to have seen that article, but it basically said, he may have stepped away, and there may be people that are dealing with the day to
He's
day.
still the control. He's still the most. He's still the owner, even if he's not the
And
CEO.
yeah, and he's the chief strategist, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
many respects. And honestly, in their inimitable fashion, they won't be first in anything, but Copilot will probably be something that survives when we've seen another 100 of these, AI assistants and everything go by the boards. Just like I would expect that Teams, will eventually eat Slack, and, Teams will probably roll over Zoom, and, they do it. It takes them 10 or 20 years sometimes. I mean, they had a thing called Net Meeting literally 20 years ago, and then they bought Skype, and they haven't done, anything with Skype in all that time.
Mm-hmm.
But
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 yeah,
I think that
Microsoft is interesting. I mean, that's a different discussion. But Microsoft is compelling to me, not in the sense that it's compelling because it's the least exciting technology company out there. It has been for decades, but it's the only one that's always there. And if you look at them over the course of time, they're always in the top three of whatever they try to. They always
listen,
even though
they
you
still
know,
have, yeah, they still have 80 or 90% of the desktops, in the world. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the
and
only
even when they have a humiliating failure, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, what they're good about is biting the bullet. I mean, the only person who I respect, recently for in that same context is Apple. Apple farted around with the Apple Car for at least 10 years, right? And they finally
Mm-hmm.
just bit the bullet and said, that's not our business. We'll be happy to run the dashboard, or we'll be happy to help you do other things. But if you don't have the ability, so Microsoft is another one that occasionally admits its mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
and goes on to do something else. And by the way, Amazon, the same thing. I mean, to me, the
Sure.
greatest thing the government could ever do is break up Amazon into Amazon and AWS, because then you'd have $2 trillion companies. I mean, it would,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, be my guest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I think we're stuck with the big guys forever, and that's why I continue to sort of say, make your plans to live within that environment. And by the way, 25 years ago, we'd say the same thing. Is Microsoft going to roll over you, or are they going to buy you? That was always the risk.
I guess I said this is my last question, but now this really will be my last question. Is there any rule or concept that you have in terms of when to call it? Speaking of biting the bullet, like where basically we did everything we could. We invested the money. We had a good team. We went down the path. There was everything within our control. We influenced. It didn't work. Shut it down.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a simple answer to that, but I think that when it's more work to go to work than it is fun, and when you spend more of your time, basically, keeping yourself sort of on track. I guess the answer is, when we look at companies, we look at head count and we look at revenue. And if you're in X years, and this is mathematical, but I mean, if you're 3 years in and you haven't driven your revenue to this level, then it's over. I mean, and by the way, the other test is, can you raise, incremental capital?
After
And
the first, after the honeymoon raise.
yeah, exactly. And I think that the market is pretty good at being very difficult on follow-on investments. And
Mm-hmm.
I think right now we're in that period. I think right now until the end of the year and we see what happens with the election, that the best advice you can give anybody is to hunker down and
Mm-hmm.
to wait it out.
Mm-hmm. Howard, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for the time.
Good to see you.
You as well.
Good luck with the new
Bootstrap.
series.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for kicking it off in such style. Bootstrapping, turning ideas into companies. Stay tuned for more of this series here on Tasty Live. I am Dylan Ratigan, and more Tasty Live coming up after this.